I am really delighted to welcome Reverend Kyndra Frazier to this offering. Kyndra is a dear friend, a dear friend. She is a board member of Nurturing Justice. She is an amazing woman of God, and I'm going to read you just a little bit about her short bio. Reverend Kyndra Frazier was recognized by the Root 100 as one of the most influential African Americans in 2020 for breaking down barriers and paving the way for future generations in the field of mental health. She is a licensed master social worker and has served as a Baptist clergywoman for over a decade. Kyndra served as the associate pastor for congregational care and wellness at the First Corinthian Baptist Church, where I was a deacon, actually, as well as the founding executive director of the Hope Center, a free mental health facility in Harlem in the city of New York from 2016 to 2020. During her tenure, she was awarded the American Psychiatric Association's Minority Achievement Award for innovation in the mental health field. Kyndra is currently the CEO and founder of Kind Consulting, a mental health and wellness boutique that supports individuals, couples, and organizations in thriving through therapeutic services, spiritual and transformational life coaching, trauma-informed training, and consulting. Kyndra has been featured in multiple print and digital publications, including Vice Magazine, the New York Times, Sojourners Magazine, and Voyage ATL Magazine. Kyndra holds a Master of Divinity from Candler School of Theology, Emory University, a Master of Science in Social Work from Columbia University, and a Bachelor of Science in Business Management from North Carolina A&T State University. She is currently a business doctoral candidate. This woman loves school, can you tell? In Bowling Green State University's Organization Development and Change program. Her research focuses on the role of workplace spirituality and its influence on strategic leadership and organizational culture. Kyndra seeks to address toxic workplace cultures within faith-based organizations, religious and spiritual communities. So one of her primary goals as a board member of Nurturing Justice is to keep us mentally and spiritually healthy. So please help me welcome Kyndra. I'm going to highlight her and myself as we, actually, I'm just going to spotlight Kyndra, and then I'm going to ask questions from the background. Is that okay? Welcome, everybody. Put some emojis up. Put some hearts and some emojis up for Kyndra welcoming her.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. It's good to be present with you all. Welcome, Alice, Helen the Goddess, Tara. It's good to see you. Loretta, thank you for being here. Luis, it's good to have your presence. Brenda, Erica, Marianne, welcome. Mia, welcome. Erica, it's great to have you here. And Ivy.
Yes.
I am grateful that Chris has, and your church has given me this opportunity to share the gospel of kindness with you all, spelled Kynd, ness. Kindness stands for, kind stands for knowing yourself in need of devotion. It is a book that I have been working on since the summer of last year, and it's almost complete. And it was inspired by hurt and challenge and pain and not wanting to carry that pain and hurt and wounding with me in a way that bled over into the congregations and the communities that I serve. So this manuscript is also a love letter to humanity, to encourage us all to think really critically about how we show up in moments that are filled with such division and such conflict that we forget the sacredness of our shared humanity. So what I would like to do, in the words of Erica Badu, I'm an artist and I can be sensitive about my things. And so I welcome you to be fully transparent and open with what you hear, feel, experience. As I read excerpts of the book to you all, I'll pause after I read the introduction and some excerpts from the first chapter to welcome dialogue. And then I'll move into a second reading of the second chapter of the book. There are 10 chapters in all. And I wanted to just offer some pieces to get us stimulated in conversation. I know Chris is going to definitely have some questions. If there's some questions that you all want to write down, please feel free to write them down and ask them, as well as any images that come up for you or any thoughts and memories that come up in your own life. So first, I'll read the introduction and the first chapter. The first chapter, some excerpts from it, is titled "Beauty Are We." It's titled "Beauty Are We." So this is the introduction to the book, and it has not been edited yet, so you all get a very raw version. So for centuries, humans have been asking the existential question, what does it mean to be human? Over the past decade, I've seen more and more institutions market the phrase be human. From foundations to nonprofits, churches, and social media influencers, there's a looming charge for humanity to be more of itself. Does this signify that we expand more into our prideful egos, deepen our greed, amplify our lust, and glorify our gluttony even more? What do human beings being more human mean for a world ravaged by capitalism, classism, racism, misogyny, transphobia, collective trauma, and religious intolerance? What does being more human mean in a world where college students peacefully demanding a ceasefire to the Israel Hamas conflict are identified as anti Semitic domestic terrorists?
Mm.
What does being human symbolize in a world where the Congo, a wealthy nation in resources, has been in crisis over 60 years after gaining its independence, with no effective support from other nations? How is being human illustrated when the sick model of our healthcare industry capitalizes off of sick bodies to sell pharmaceutical drugs that bring about new onsets of health risks, of sick and concerns? What does it mean to be human with faith leaders across religions and spiritualities are found being verbally, sexually, or spiritually abusive to maintain power, and it is normalized by their followers as that's just the way they are? I believe we are clear on what it means to be human. I would like to suggest another pathway forward. We are at an age in our collective human consciousness and development where we must come into agreement and alignment on how we value one another in the midst of difference, diversity, and religious dogma. The legacy of colonialism in our world pits our differences against us, disallowing us from seeing our neighbors as ourselves, despite all being made in the image and likeness of God. It is not that a singular ethnic group or sexual orientation or a particular class made in the image of God. It is that humanity, with all its gifts of distinct divergences, was collectively made in the brilliance of a divine source that desires humanity to unfold into life and life more abundantly for itself. Master teacher Jesus, Yeshua HaMashiach of Nazareth, reminds us that he came to usher in life and life more abundant. However, it seems as a collective, we lean on the side of death, destruction, and harm when people don't believe, pray, look like, or behave as we do or desire them to. We no longer have room to anthropomorphize the collective energy many call God. God will no longer be contained in the minute and limited imaginations of human beings who have not tapped into the fullness of their divine potential within themselves as they seek to be more human. Yeshua knew that living within the confines of his humanity was not sufficient. In John 10:30, he expressed, I and the Father are one. In essence, Yeshua said, me and God are one in the same, and I am clear, I am God. Upon naming this in John 10, the Pharisees were ready to stone Yeshua for lying. His ready response was to remind them that the law said that they were gods too. Yeshua understood the notion of being the God that serves through its gifts and recognized that even he was not the gift giver, as that is the ultimate God. We are all the gift God, lowercase g, but not the gift giver, God, capital G. Yeshua understood that the sacredness of honoring the one source that existed all around him, in him, and simultaneously as him and his neighbors, and additionally as creation itself. What if I told you that the existential question to be asked is not what it means to be human, but what does it mean to be divine? What does it mean to be God? I know there are stones that could be thrown, but if you have this book, it means that you are ready to go on an adventure of discovering the God within you that has been calling you into a deeper relationship with thriving, abundance, justice, integrity, joy, and life itself. Divinity, I believe, is the goal, not humanity. The goal is not to be human. The goal is to be more and more divine. The point of incarnating into human form is to understand how to access our divinity in the midst of being human. This is good news. We access our divinity through our devotion to know the self as the self, to know the God within us as the God who is also outside of us and more expansive and all embracing than we could ever imagine. Being committed to the self is a sacred act of knowing the self. This is what it means to know yourself in need of devotion. The gospel of kindness is the good news of what it means to embrace and live out your divinity in human form. The crux of the gospel of kindness is 2 Timothy 2:15, and I like the King James version. It reads this way: Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. In this text, the words study, show, word, and truth translate in Greek as diligent, exhibit, message, and reality, respectively. In substituting these words, the scripture reads this way, which I thought was interesting: diligently exhibit yourself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the message of reality. Paul wrote this letter to Timothy at a time when the Christian community was contending with persecution. Paul desired for Timothy to perpetuate the Christian faith by studying his scrolls, since there was no single bound book called the Bible at that time. There were many concepts lost in translation when biblical texts originally written in Hebrew and Aramaic were translated into Greek. A metaphysical interpretation of 2 Timothy 2:15, diligently exhibit yourself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the message of reality, means that the subject becomes a point of excavation, and the subject is you, not a text external to you. You are the beholder of messages of varying realities, whether that be your reality, society's reality, your family's reality, or divine reality. It is through spiritual discernment, deepening your understanding of divine principles that most resonate with you in your exploration of higher spiritual ethics, using the tools accessible, whether that be therapy to creative visualization, Reiki, and several other modalities, that one rightly divides the reality to live into. This roots them in acting justly, loving mercy, and walking humbly. Being devoted requires consistent commitment to the selves, the little self as well as the highest self, to decipher and discern between the multiple realities you exist within. In our world, we are bombarded by competing realities, whether watching the news or scrolling our timelines on various social media platforms, or listening to the opinionated voices that subdue us in our day to day lives. Although we live in a 3D reality, this reality is only the doorway into more expansive realities of the spirit world. If you believe we are spiritual beings living a human experience, the foundational reality we move from is spiritual first, so as not to get derailed and uprooted by this 3D simulation we physically exist in. The world we live in is constantly tempting us to look outside of ourselves to get what we need, when we already possess what we need, as we are gods, made in the image and likeness of God. In rightly dividing reality, we must contend with the realities passed down epigenetically. through our DNA. That would suggest that we are inclined to certain behaviors and ways of being that create personalities and cultural standards, which have the potential to displace us from the truth of who we are. I am in human form. The work that we do to heal can provoke shame and guilt. However, Paul reminds us that we can release the shame. Brene Brown reminds us that shame is believing that we are flawed and unworthy of love and belonging. Shame is an illusion. We are to learn from guilt as the things we have been through or done to harm others are not who we are. Research has shown that unlike genetic imprints, epigenetic impressions can shift, change, and be transformed. As a therapist and survivor of trauma, I understand that the nature of traumatic experience and how it disconnects us from our sense of belonging to ourselves and others. On a spiritual level, trauma can sever our psychic connection to the great mystery that loves and cares for us all immensely. The conflicts around the world and within our professional and familial relationships that cause humans to harm other humans is a reflection of this disconnection. If we truly loved our neighbors as ourselves, we wouldn't harm who we perceive as the other because we would recognize that we are another other. The epidemic of the loveless neighbor is because so many of us have lost the sacred love and connection to ourselves. The gospel of kindness is a balm for us all to remind us of how sacred we each are. Yeshua understood, along with so many other spiritual leaders, the intricate realities that are woven in our world of sight that entrap and entangle us so much that we learn to take on identities that pigeonhole us into our human limitations of bigotry, self centeredness, deceitfulness, jealousy, envy, and supremacist thinking. The truth is, we have all come to liberate ourselves from our bondage of being so tethered to our human impediments that we miss the immense power and utility of our divinity. The dynamic reality of who we've always been has been waiting in tiptoe anticipation for each of us to live a fully integrated life centered in the fullness of our divinity. The divinity within you is a microcosm of the divinity outside of you, personal to you, yet universal and abundant in love, justice, generosity, compassion, kindness, and equity. The gospel of kindness is an invitation to be kind so we may all go forth and embody abundant life. That is the introduction, and so I'll pause there. I'd love to hear your thoughts, anything that
Kyndra,
came
you
up.
said so much. You said so much.
I
You know,
know, I
they're not
know.
your family. Exactly. Yeah, I have a good friend of mine,
Wait,
as mine,
hold
and
on a second.
she,
Reverend Ruby, I need you to mute. I'm sorry. Okay. Um, so you said so much there that I really the, I'm gonna like lift up what came out for me, like what stood out for me, and it's we sing pretty much the same song. So you said everybody's saying be human, be human, be human, be more human, and you're saying well, what, greedy, gluttonous, angry, cruel, why should we be more human? What we really need to be striving for is to be more divine.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you define divinity?
How
Right?
do I define divinity?
I
Yeah.
mean, like, what does that mean? Like, if you say, if you're saying to me, try to be, the purpose of our life, of our existence is to be more divine. What does that mean?
That's a great question to open up to the group.
Yeah.
I would love to hear from the
Okay.
group. I did a lot of talking in the beginning. So.
Okay. All right. Okay. So,
I think it means to be more like to be as much like Jesus as you can be. To be divine is to take after the one who is divine.
Can I just say that it's more about it is like Jesus, but it's also about this idea of being our higher selves, like the raising of our consciousness, right? The idea that we are to disconnect from this things of the world the things that are to make us lighter. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Who was going to say something? Louise put in the chat, divinity equals perfection, a difficult goal to reach. What say you?
I don't know if I can understand that definition, but I think I don't know if it was Tara who was just speaking prior to that, or April.
That was
Yeah,
April.
I think it's more of like disconnecting from earthly matters. Like, okay, we want to talk about politics, y'all go talk about it. Like, that's not from where I'm from. I'm from over here. And so I think in that, if you think about it in that realm, it's Louise's point, it's very hard to do because we have a human experience that shapes often how we think about ourselves and how we treat others. But it's not impossible. It's very hard, but it's not impossible. And thanks to Reverend Chris and Reverend Ruby, I see evidence that people like this exist or are closer to it, and I'm still working on it. I know they'll probably say they're still working on it, but, I think it's definitely possible. Tara, I see your hands up.
Yep. Go ahead, Tara.
I would agree with all of those points and echo them. And also, I think it's also about consistency with sort of divine principles, whether it's Christianity and actually following what Christ would have done, as opposed to some of these so-called Christians, frankly, wanting to slash Medicaid and health insurance for poor people, or to go after trans kids, or to be racist, actually rejecting all of those things and doing what God would have done, which I believe is to love, and the opposite of all of that.
Right. Who else? What does it mean? What does trying to be? I mean, I love what April said in terms of trying to elevate to a higher consciousness, right? And that's no easy feat living in the world. I mean, how do you do that living in this kind of world that we're living, especially now? Right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you said we're spiritual beings having a human experience. How do we divorce ourselves from, or how do we distance ourselves or disconnect ourselves from the human experience and try to live into the more spiritual experience?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it would be nice if we could just live in a bubble and just stay. I mean, I thought to myself earlier today, like with all this crap going on, like I just want to be in a April. April sent me to a spa in Rhode Island. It's called Bodhi Spa, and it's like nothing but jacuzzis, right? And steam rooms and hot rooms and showers and nice smells and beautiful sounds, and it's very quiet, like whisper only. And I thought I could just live here, like just I don't need anything. I don't even need my phone. I just want to stay right there. How can I stay in that moment, in that Zen moment, like forever, always?
Yeah, I'm with you on that, Chris, and I am in alignment with all that everyone has said. I think the one that sticks out to me most is what I think she may have left. Erica, was it Erica? No, it wasn't Erica. It was someone else who named that it is very difficult to lean into our divinity as we wear in this human skin. Somebody else mentioned that it takes consistency. When you mentioned consistency, I thought of practice. I was on a podcast called What is Practice a few weeks ago, talking about how practice shows up not only in our organizational lives professionally, but in our personal lives. And ritual has been such an important practice for me in my personal life. And I think of rituals in the Bible. I think of the rituals that are ancestral to my lineage, and how important they are for keeping me rooted and grounded, to remember that there is a context that is much larger than me. And I think oftentimes we forget when we aren't practicing consistently, whatever it is that we are practicing in terms of our spiritual practices. It can be so easily to get entangled into the world and be in the world and of the world when we're trying not to be of the world. So thank you all.
Ritual is important. Go ahead, Alice. I see you.
So I'm agreeing with everybody, and I also think, you know, with the practice and the rituals and the aiming to be that better, higher person that we want to be, aiming for that divine. I go back to that beginning song where you have to be kind to yourself too, because we are not going to be perfect yet, and we are still human. And as hard as we try, there were some days where we're just not going to do as well, and we just have to remember that the next day is a new day, and we're starting over, and we can practice again and give ourselves that kindness that we're a work in progress, and we need that practice.
Right. In Alcoholics Anonymous, they say, you know, it's spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. You know, we're never going to reach, we'll probably never reach spiritual perfection, right? But it's always about making progress. And Alice, I wanted to like, you know, tomorrow we could start. I've had days where I've had to stop the day. I've had to stop and start from the beginning. Like, oh, wait a second. It's the middle of the day. In fact, it's like right before coming on this Zoom that I said, oh, I'm feeling really crunchy in my spirit, and I need to stop and breathe and drink some water and pray and set my intention to have a joyful, informative, beautiful, nurturing justice session, and really embrace, you know, what's ahead, as opposed to what I just found out about 15 minutes ago that disgusted me and upset me, right? So yeah, we can start the day over anytime. That's my point. Ivy, welcome. Hi.
Hi, Chris. One of the things that I was thinking the whole time through was, and I think you sort of touched on it at the end, was when you talked about othering and us seeing each other as neighbor instead of, doing all the othering that we do. But one of the things, what I didn't hear as you were reading the introduction, or what I did hear as you were reading the introduction, I heard a let's make these changes as individuals and not in community. And I'm missing community, and I'm missing what we do in community, because the divisiveness happens in community. It doesn't happen as we stand alone. So we can all go and be divine and stand in our little divine silos and still be othering and not, taking people in as one another. So I hope, and I'm thinking that you'll probably bring that in later, and that I'm just jumping the gun. But if not, I think that needs to be thought about a little bit, because community is very important. Thank you.
It is extremely important. I think you bring up a critical insight that is covered in the book. And it's interesting. I think that traditional Christianity, in terms of when I'm thinking of atonement theology and the way that traditionalists approach atonement theology, our salvation becomes very individualistic. It is.
Okay, wait, can you stop and say what what the prevailing atonement theology is, just briefly and simply?
The prevailing atonement theology is that Jesus died for our sins in order that we might be able to have access to eternal life, right? That is at least how I learned about what traditional atonement theology is. There's a book that I had the opportunity to co-author with several other minds called Taking on the Cross, Reimagining the Life and Death of Jesus. To Ivy's point, I lift up in this book and in that book that community is what has saved me. in terms of what it means to know myself in devotion. I only know myself devotion to be in need of devotion because of those that I am in relationship with. I think that the traditional atonement theology and its very narrow view of a singular person taking on the sins of the world disrupts the lineages that we all come through, because we all have ancestors. And I'm clear that it is through the community that I come through that I exist. When I think about the concept of Ubuntu, I am because we are. When it comes to understanding that there were people outside of Jesus, in terms of my ancestors who bled, who died, who sacrificed. My grandfather was a butler for the same European American family for over 50 years that allowed me to have access to college. His grandfather was a sharecropper. His great great grandfather was a sharecropper. And only 4 generations back, that grandfather was enslaved. And so I recognize that it is community that supports me in being able to be present. And it is only through being able to have access to others that we can thrive. So Ivy, thank you for bringing that very important insight into the space.
Excellent. That's excellent. Um, so you touched a little bit in the introduction about belonging and trauma, and I wanted to. I mean, I don't know what you're covering in the second excerpt, but just a little bit about how do we. Well, it seems to me that it's a little bit challenging to lean into being divine, especially in community when you have other people in the community that are not interested in being divine, but are interested in living out their fully implementing their full humanity, which encompasses all of those things that you talked about: greed, gluttony, power over dynamics, anger, rage, cruelty, etc. How do you be in community and trying to be divine when others in your community are completely oblivious to the notion, aren't really interested, just want to be, more fully human as possible in not all the good ways?
That's a great question. April Brown said, "Woo, this part." I think I think we all can have some dialogue around this. The first thing that comes up for me, Chris, when I'm thinking about being in communities that are misaligned with operating in the divine principles that Jesus teaches, and love and mercy and grace, and patience and kindness, all those good fruits of the spirit, that it is important, one, to be rooted in some inner belonging. I think that it can, relational trauma is real. And I think that relational trauma and other forms of trauma can disrupt our sense of belonging to ourselves and our communities. And when it comes to building a reservoir of resilience within and of yourself, I think that comes with the consistency of practice that we talked about earlier. Whatever your spiritual practices are, whatever you're leaning into, how you are using scripture or whatever sacred text that might be most resonant to you, to inform you about the ways that you are made in the image and likeness of God, the ways that you are of value, the ways that you are a being that has been created in worth because you are the bearer of the image of God. I think that's the first thing. I think that the second thing is to really discern what community that you are belonging to, because you may have evolved past that community. I know for my personal experience, in terms of the experience that I had writing this book, I didn't realize the toxicity that can exist in spiritual community and faith community, which leads me to the current work I'm doing now in my doctoral program. I understand in most spiritual spaces leaders have not been taught well about how to manage the polarities that exist within communal spaces. And when I'm talking about managing polarities, I'm speaking specifically of those things that bring us into conflict in church spaces, whether you're thinking about church tradition versus church innovation, whether you're thinking about power in the leadership of the clergy or power in the congregation. Those types of polarities. We don't do a very good job doing both and work in our congregations, particularly. We often confront conflict with either or thinking, and I think it's really important to really build a stamina. And I think we have to build that stamina in a myriad of ways to be able to hold differing opinions and understand that it's not the end of the world, and understand that it doesn't require us to get violent with each other, but enter into conversations with curiosity, so that we might be able to better understand what the opposing viewpoint might be, what the gifts are of that viewpoint, what the risks and challenges are of that viewpoint on both sides. And I'll pause there, Erica. I'd love to hear what you have to offer.
Yeah, no, I love everything you're saying. I find that often when it comes to the like leadership polarization in my experience that I'm having is that it is often based in, you know, me trying to help people live less out of fear and live more into faith. And I'm starting to realize like that's not my cross to bear. And I think I've been carrying that cross a little too long.
Mm.
And I have like as of like the past few weeks been like just praying more into that. Whereas like I'm going to do this, I'm going to shift my approach a little bit. And if they want to keep living in fear, God will do that work. Like he gets all the glory. But at the same time, I think I'm just gonna, say my piece, say what I have to say. And I know like God's going to do great things. But at the same time, I think I'm gonna let him do his thing. I think before it was more of like, let me showcase it. Let me teach you all the things. You have no idea what is available. And now I'm just going to be very strategic as to what I do, because what I don't want to do, which is a hard balance, is I also don't want to mute or dilute the heavy work that still needs to happen. Like I'm not going anywhere. My approach is just going to change, and it's going to be far more strategic versus me seeing or disagreeing with someone and just being like, you just don't get it because you're so afraid. Like this is always like an internal dialogue that I have going on. And so I'm done beating on that drum, because it's like talking to a wall, and there's so much there that needs to happen for them to come over to kind of operating from a place of faith. And so in that shift, it has just helped me to be yeah, I guess it's a little lighter, but at the same time it's still heavy work. I don't know how to explain it. But just something that I was reacting to as you were speaking.
No, you explained it quite well. I love the insights and the wisdom you provided, Erica. Just thinking about one, discerning what's your cross to bear and what's not your cross
Hmm.
to bear.
Hmm.
Understanding that there is work that God does, and then limitations and what we can do, particularly when it comes to supporting others and where they might be, as well as this idea of strategy.
Hmm.
It is, I think that, and I don't know what it is about churches. It might be because they are institutions that have been present for centuries.
Hmm.
That it's very difficult to approach conflict, particularly in a strategic way.
Hmm.
So thank you for mentioning all those things, Erica.
You're very welcome, April.
It's so funny first of all, thank you for your insight. Kyndra, you were all up in my collard greens and fried chicken. And I don't really know you that well before you come up in my kitchen and get on my secret recipes. I just need you to understand
Uh-oh.
that. See, I don't know you like that, but I'm so happy that you're here. And I'm so happy that I'm here. I think it's fascinating to me when I think of the two different organizations that were really just bumping up against what you were saying. And one is the church, and one is the community organization that I run. And what is startling to me is the resonance of community is really the key to all of it, and how in the community organization we actually do have community, right? And I think sometimes in our church, or I'll speak for me, in my church space, we actually don't really have community. Do you understand what I'm saying? You know, the community is what happens on Sunday and sometimes at the meetings, but real community, right? Like, I know your story, you know my story. And I wonder sometimes if that's where the polarization happens, because I really don't really know you in the first beginning. We're not really in community. We are in a contrived space, you see. And so, you know, then what you said about, you know, discerning whether or not this is actually your community becomes a space where you have to occupy so you can do some thinking, you know. But what also came to mind is that if you're trying to get to detachment, right, you know, there is a space where you don't enter into the conflict. Do you understand? Because this is not really the piece, right? We are in the effort department. That's what Chris said. We're in the effort department. God has all the decision making control, the final say, all of those things. But I think it's startling to me what you said to me made me think about, well, who really is your community? Mm. And if I had to put money on it, I would never say that it's this community organization that I'm around. Everyone is at least 10 years younger than me and even younger, right? And so I just really want to thank you for that insight. That was really helpful to kind of pivot how even I think about the work that I do in the church. So I just really
But
needed to
wait,
say.
but wait, April, because you said that where you experience community most is in the community organization and not
Yeah,
necessarily, and not in the church. So that is
yeah,
your community, no matter how old they are, how much younger they are, that is your community, because
right,
maybe because you're aligned around um, core values that you share,
right.
as
And
opposed to in the church where it's like maybe just a collection of people that come together out of habit or ritual or whatever, right?
I
For
want
a
to say
certain,
though, I want to say, but
sorry,
we've so agreed in the community organization that we're going to struggle together. You
right,
understand? Like we've made some agreements that we are going to be in this thing together. I have your back, right? And I have your back. I
right, but
can't
that
stand
doesn't happen
though.
in the
That's
church.
okay. Right. I can't
That,
stand you though, because you've gotten on my nerves. Yeah, so, but you love me though. You
right,
understand? Like those are our conversations. But those conversations don't happen, at least not in my church space.
right, right. Who else has? Thanks, April. Excellent insights. And it's good to hear yourself talk, right? So that you can, sort of flesh through some of this stuff. And yeah, and the question becomes like, well, maybe you don't, how do you make the church, Kyndra, how do you make the church the kind of community, and you said it, you said, around some ritual, but then you still have the people who are just not aligned. And I said, well, you actually answered it. You said discerning if it's the right community for you to be in,
I,
right? Go ahead.
yeah, I think April, you bring up some good points as well as Chris and Erica. I read what you wrote in the chat. When I just finished writing a paper on looking at the epigenetics of labor abuse,
Mm.
and how it informs church workplace behavior, and how kindness can be a modality to kind of disrupt the toxicity. And I had to create a model of kindness for ecclesial communities. And much of what I was trying to do in the model was create opportunities for conversation, like real conversations to happen in the church that are undergirded with practices of kindness. I don't think that we think of church being a space for collaborative change because it's such a hierarchical model of leadership. And I think because the church is such a closed system in terms of how we make decisions, usually decisions are top down. We don't integrate a lot of times, at least in Black church space, which is where I'm accustomed to being. We don't integrate other voices in the congregation and within the other layers of the organizational structure to contribute to conversations that could support us in one, build a community, two, actually being able to know each other, and three, being able to forge new pathways even with divergent thought. I think that oftentimes churches are considered to be homogenous spaces of thought when they're not. And I don't know if it's sad or not sad, but I think it's important to get curious about why. Yeah, so I'll stop there. Ivy.
You're muted.
Ivy.
Okay, there we go. Um, so that was an interesting, the last two things that were said were very interesting because we talked about, we got to church as community, and I wasn't really thinking about church as community when we got there because I see church as, or I have seen church as a place that closes in on itself,
Mm.
and it's really a closed, if it's community at all, it's a closed community, and it doesn't go out into the world. And that's I think, that was one of the things I think that Jesus was so hot on with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, that whatever you call them, that they sat inside their own circles all the time and didn't get out into the world and integrate people. Church was its own silo. And I think that it's really important that we don't think of, that church doesn't think of itself as the only community. We have to open that up a little bit. It's bad, even in, I think, and I can't speak about Black church because I haven't been in Black church for a while. Uh, they can't be my community most of the time, but we have to stop being so church centered as a community. We need to look out, and that's all I got.
Ivy,
Right.
you dropping some wisdom. I see April clapping. I see a lot of nods of heads as you were talking. Ivy, I love seeing your face when you're on. But you inspired some thought in terms of church, you not experiencing church as community and how we often don't go outside of the walls. I think there's something to be said about supremacist thinking as it relates to religiosity, and how oftentimes Christian fundamentalists at least believe that their way is the right way. And it becomes very difficult with that type of framing to then go out into a world that's filled with so much diversity of thought, religious identities, sexual orientations, ideologies, and not proselytize, which is often what evangelism does to many of us. That I grew up in a Christian traditional context. And so it has become really important to me as I move outside of the walls of the church to really center my life in the work of interfaith and interspirituality when it comes to understanding why other people believe what they believe, what do they believe that I can possibly bring into my own way of thinking and being, which I think is an act of being devoted to ourselves, because we are not, I believe, singular creatures that should be only dedicated to one singular way of being, but so many of us are socialized that way. And when it comes to those types of single stories being disrupted, it can make many of us fearful. So I'll stop there. Tara.
This is such a fascinating and enlightening conversation for me, and the idea of church as community, because I'm somebody that I grew up in a very kind of conservative parish, a conservative Catholic parish. And so and I'm a very liberal person in all ways. And even when I was growing up, the experience of, I got through my sacraments all the way up to confirmation when I was like a teenager or so, but I wasn't allowed to have my own mother as my sponsor for that because my parents weren't married. So feeling sort of like I didn't belong in that community early on, and really for a long time, and really until I got involved with Nurturing Justice, where this is a spiritual community where I feel entirely at home, but the one I grew up in, I didn't so much. So it's really fascinating to me and such an important conversation that resonates a lot with me.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
Tara. Thanks. So, any other comments on this topic? I mean, I could be here for hours with you, Kyndra. So, and I'm sure others. Erica, do you have anything?
I do. I have many thoughts. First, I want to say thank you for having me here.
Oh,
And thank you for all of this wisdom and dialogue. I feel very welcomed as someone who is more agnostic, but spiritual. I think it's interesting to me, right, to sit and be able to listen and be open-minded to all types of ideologies, because I think that I think we all are entitled to believe in whatever we resonate with. And that is true to each of us. I made this little circle on my paper, which I think has been like coming back to me as like with all the things that we've spoken about, as humans, we want to be connected and we want to feel like we belong. So in that process, we try to build value and find those connection points with others, which then sometimes then segregates us and becomes like this power struggle and goes back around and around and around. Where I think a lot of kindness and being human comes from spaces like this, where we can have different views or different beliefs, and to be able to have a dialogue and come out with more information to reflect on what it is that, again, and to me, I think divinity is like being comfortable and conscious of like who you are and open to learning more and adjusting, like with values in mind, but being able to kind of create a space where like you can continue to iterate on yourself and like reach that higher consciousness. Yeah, man, it's a lot, but I think that where you started the conversation with capitalism is that so much of society and like all of the institutions, no matter what they are, unfortunately, it seems like segregation and othering serves that system.
We lost your audio.
Oh, can you hear me?
Can y'all hear me?
I can still hear.
Oh,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I can hear.
Okay. So I think I'll just close on like the system that is set feeds off of that, right? Is that division and isolation, because then you're constantly, at least for many people, especially now, you're searching for something that's going to give you a feeling, especially people who don't feel comfortable or confident in who they are or have a community to reach out to. I think continuing to have conversations like this where we accept that people are human and that for the most part things are not intentional towards us and just show up with kindness. I think that's the best we can do. So that's some of my thoughts, but thank you so much for everything, everybody.
Lost my internet for a hot second, so that's what happened to me. That's why I couldn't hear you.
Gotcha.
Okay. Um, I don't want to, Christine, I want to get Christine, Marianne, Helen, Elena, anybody else Mia, anybody else want to chime in? Louise, Laura, anybody else have any comment about this part? I mean, are y'all willing to go for a little while longer? How long is the excerpt from the second part, Kyndra?
I will shorten it so we can
Okay,
have more conversation.
okay, great.
Yeah. What I'll do is I'll describe this chapter is called, it's the fourth chapter of the book. It's called Belonging, the Root Work of Your Divinity. And it's centered in inner belonging that is informed by communal belonging, to Ivy's point. And the chapter talks about my own experience with ancestral veneration work. And what I believe the I am is our connection to ancestral wisdom and intelligence that we're all connected to, that's within us all. And I talk about an experience that I had with healing my ancestral line through some ritual work that I did with my sister and a cousin of mine who are both spiritual practitioners and healers, really, really powerful, just women. And I have spirit has continued to broaden my therapeutic practice and the work that I do with my clients. There's one client particularly that I work with. I'm not sure what I call him in the chapter, but it's not his real name. But he asked me he is a survivor of religious trauma. We've been working together for about 4 years, and I've been supporting him in reframing a lot of the Christian theology that was very tormenting to him. And he invited me into a process of welcoming him into his ancestral home. So we were able to do some work together. So this chapter describes the work that we did together. So the story picks up from here. Let's see. Casey and I have existed in a therapeutic partnership for about 4 years. He has been intentional about healing through his PTSD and complex trauma as he engaged in many years of therapy prior to me. Casey is also a survivor of religious trauma. Much of our work has been supporting him in not only navigating the pain points produced by religious trauma, but companioning with him in developing his own sacred text of belonging to bring balm to his trauma imprints through a variety of therapeutic modalities. Casey and I would be unlikely conversation partners in the larger world, as he is a middle aged white man with bright red hair living in upstate New York, and I'm a middle aged African American queer woman living in the South. It is healing that brings us together. Recently, Casey invited me to create a space for him within our therapy session to meet his ancestors. After gathering more information about them prior to our session, this was not an odd request from him. However, it was the first time I've been asked to create such a space within a therapy session. Casey is of Scottish ancestry. I serve as a second year dean at One Spirit Learning Alliance for their interfaith seminary students. One of my students lives in Scotland and sent me 2 stones from Scotland about 2 weeks prior to Casey's request that sit on my ancestor altar. Being that stones hold memory, I brought these stones into our therapeutic moment, now turned into a ritual. Before starting any session, I pour water into a small bowl and I program the water to be a portal of healing, insight, and understanding for those I serve. I also ask it to function as a barrier of protection, keeping their stuff from me and my stuff from them. The bowl of water was present. We will discuss more about the element of water in chapter 6. Lastly, I brought in a white candle representing God, clarity, and the element of fire to strengthen the connection between the spiritual and physical worlds. Once the candle was lit, I offered prayers of gratitude and protection. I welcomed my ancestors and his ancestors into the ritual and presented them our intention for connecting with them. Following this, I invited Casey into the awareness of his breath and began walking him through a creative visualization of his ancestral home. What happened next was astounding. I began to take on the voice of his ancestral home, which was constantly welcoming him home. By the end of this experience, we were both in tears, embracing profound awe and gratitude. I believe Casey's story will be best conveyed by him, telling it himself. He graciously wrote down his experience and gave me permission to share his words here. Take respite and solace in Casey's encounter with the indigenous within his first home of belonging. Casey writes this: close my eyes. When I open them again, I am afloat in the Scottish Sea. Its black water still and silent, unknown depths freezing the earth itself as it descends. The bottom has never been reached. This is where memory resides, where it rests, where we all feel peace eventually. Here in the depths, I am face up floating, staring gratefully at the overcast thick clouds of gray and blue that clot the horizon of the visible distance, to the horizon and onward to eternity. This is my safe space. I call it the lock. I look to my right. There are smooth moss-covered stones, just big enough for a single foot at a time, provided that foot never rests flat. They race from my right side to a nearby shore of larger rocks and moss that comprises a mountainous rocky shoreline, bathed in deep green and the coldest gray. The air has a crisp bite, but only at the first kiss of a wind. The deeper torrents of wind that follow are warm like the embrace of the earth itself, the joyful hugs and gentle holds of the mother, the thousands of hands of the matriarchal line, all coming to hold this new child of the family. Come home at last. I feel the joyful warmth of countless hands on my back, shoulders, and neck. My crown tingles from their gentle kisses. I am devastated by the love. I bow my head in unworthiness. The breeze fills my hands and pushes my hands away from my face. It rises under my chin, forcing my head to rise and my eyes upward. I hear, do not be afraid, child. This is yours. This is your home. Stand proud now on these family lands. Raise your eyes and welcome home. I walk gently to the shoreline and the fog opens, revealing a tomb half carved into a nearby cave, the front protruding onto the moss-lined stones beneath, made of large cut logs and covered in pitch and reeds, built to survive the coldest, fiercest rains. One wooden door and one glowing orange window, the only warm light for the entire scene. I stand upon the doorway and place my palm flat upon the door. The vibration of the experiences of 1,000 lifetimes shook my body. The existence of power and magic shimmer under my hands. The history of a lineage of seers who walked down the veil. I could hear their countless songs and triumphs, their war cries, their children's laughter, so gentle on the unforgiving Caledonian winds that somehow make them louder and carry them as far as they can to whomever they can hear them. Whoever can hear, let them hear. The joy that overwhelms me makes it difficult to stand. My legs shake, eyes blind with tears. I push the door open and step across the threshold. The warmth that enveloped me is unspeakable. The first animal skin wrapped around an Arctic wanderer, thought lost forever in the world. My frozen bones cry out in relief. To my left, a table of wood, rustic and harsh, but oiled, smooth from centuries of occasion and celebration. Countless rough elbows, slippery from drink and grease, slipping and refilling to whatever memory they are resonating in. To my right is a fireplace built into the heart of the cave, carved out from the ancient stones, lit forever to keep the heart of this coast burning. In front are two chairs, worn in comfort by centuries of blood and sweat, carrying the awareness of millions of important decisions. One chair for me, the other for whomever will fill it. I feel a knock at the door just then and go to the front to see who is there. A red-headed woman dressed in white with dirty soles, illuminated in a pale blue gossamer, comes in and tells me to look to see who else has come. I looked out into the distance beyond the house, into the distant mountains and forest among the harshly open fields of moss and rock that I had not seen before. Through the endless miles of unfolding terrain in the distance came a single line of glowing pale blue, the line of ancestors that were coming to my door, reached as far as I could see until there was only the pale conflict of the darkening sky and glowing souls in the distance. As it seems to have always been, we are no strangers to unforgivable and unlivable terrains, but we have been blessed here. This home has made us what we are and has shaped our right to be here with it. Our understanding of the nature of our lives and how we have always fought unwinnable battles and risen above unstoppable forces. We have been molded by our survival. We have been taught by the earth itself. We have learned to live in community with our souls and our lands. This is what you must learn, and we are here to teach you. They were all here, she told me. Everyone, all of them, and they would all love to meet me. I was so overwhelmed by gratitude and peace. I was solid on the ground I stood upon. I was stable. My feet landed gently upon the earth in thankfulness and determination, ready for the task to come. I felt then that the earth was welcoming my steps. It was recognizing my actions in this world, responding to my recognition of her. My mind went in and out of trance states, various gamma, alpha vibrational frequencies as I communed with these ancestors. And I'll pause there. That is Caleb's story.
So I'm interested in hearing, and that was beautiful. And the concept of you doing this ritual work with him to try to help him, to bring him back to his ancestral line and to bring it back to memory. I mean, I've been saying frequently these days that, really what we're on a journey on is the journey of just trying to remember, right? Remember who we really are. And so much stuff has happened that we've forgotten, but we really are, it's really about remembering. But that encompasses all of the above. And it's interesting that you say, that you tell this story.
What?
Because from time to time you'll get snippets about your ancestors that you didn't know, right? So my sister sent me something yesterday about a cousin of our great grandmother, and our great grandmother had come up in another context before, and then I learned some more stuff about her. But all of this is really very important, and how we connect back to our ancestral lines, and how we can connect back to create this sense of belonging. Right? We do belong to something eternal.
Mm-hmm.
Who has? Even the universe. Our energy has never changed, right? It's just, it cannot be destroyed, right? So who's got any questions or comments about that particular and ritual, about the need for ritual?
I see Brenda's question. I am hoping to be finished with the book in the next couple of months so I can get it edited, and I believe I'm going to self-publish. We'll see. I'm talking to a couple of publishers. We'll see. I'm hoping that'll be out this summer. Thank you for asking.
I've got a publisher for you, by the way, Kyndra.
Oh,
really, really great person who will publish your book.
Oh, thank you.
So, all right. So this is my question. For many people sitting in traditional churches, white or black churches, right? Traditional churches, the notion of ritual is confined to certain things, right? The notion of ritual is tied to the ritual of baptism, the ritual of, without it ever really being explained properly or understood, the ritual of communion, which just seems like another throwaway moment where people don't really understand and grasp what they're doing in community to, when they receive the elements, right? maybe a ritual. I mean, that's really all. I mean, in the Catholic Church, there are other rituals, but for the most part, baptism and communion,
What
and then
about
of course, go
Reverend
ahead.
Chris, what about Palm Sunday? I feel like
Yeah, well, Palm Sunday, right? You get the palms, Ash
Ash
Wednesday, you get the
Wednesday. Yeah.
ashes, right? But these rituals are connected to maintaining, in my opinion, maintaining a paradigm, right, and a tradition within a particular faith, right? But it's not necessarily connected to you, or it's never really explained how it's connected to you, right? So like when I give the ashes, from dust you came, to dust you shall return. Remember your dustiness. It should inspire in you humility. But that's one thing. But how is it connected? What can we do to really incorporate the elements of fire and wind and water and earth and nature, and connect those elements deeply, right, to our very being, okay, and our ancestral heritage. And most of us don't even really know our ancestral heritage beyond a couple of generations, right? So where do you start with that if it's something that's really unfamiliar to you? Kyndra?
Hey, you better be good
Oh,
for the trick or treating.
just mute Helen, the guy.
Sorry.
Oh, no worries, no worries. I think for me, it starts with your own curiosity. I think out of Awaken Sleep in 2014, Spirit was just like build an altar. And I didn't understand what that meant. I didn't get what that directive was, but I immediately started putting some things on an altar for my maternal ancestors, not recognizing that in most, if not all, African traditional religions, you build an altar, which is an altar of remembrance or honoring to your ancestors before you build any other altars to any other aspects of God, whether that be an altar for love or an altar for protection. So me, it came through that way. And I've been understanding the more that I learn and grow on how important it is to speak the names of those that have came before me. I was introduced. I mean, in the Bible, we talk about the great cloud of witnesses.
Right.
In Paul's letters to Timothy, and Timothy, he talks about how Timothy carries the faith of his grandmother. I mean, even when we're thinking about Moses being interacting with the burning bush. I am says that I am the God of your ancestors. So there must be something about this thing about ancestral generation, especially when we look at texts like I think it's maybe Matthew's, or I'm forgetting the book, but where it goes through the whole
Oh yeah, that's
lineage,
Matthew.
all
Yeah.
the begats, right? That is like a written libation. For those that are familiar with libation in the African tradition, we pour libations to honor our ancestors, libations of water, and so the explicitness of ancestral veneration in the Bible to me is very clear, but I think that many Christians get scared or spooked when you began to talk about venerating or honoring ancestors outside of Jesus. This is what traditional atonement theology does. It takes us away, for me personally, it disconnects me from an entire lineage that I belong to, whose names also need to be empowered, just as Jesus is empowered on the Sundays that we take communion. I think it's just as important to empower our own direct lineage of ancestors in the same way.
Yes, I agree. All right. Well, we're coming to the close of our time together. While I was thinking about earlier, just a couple of I sent you an email. I'm trying to find it now, but okay. So in this era of cruelty, in this era of disremembrance in this era where our very identities are trying to be erased, right? And where we're being so othered and persecuted for our otherness. I guess, it brings up a lot of fear, right? And it's causing division in our churches. And so I want to ask you, fill in the blank. When there's disorder in the church, when there's division in the church,
we can engage it as opportunity. When there's division in the church, we can see it as a welcome gift instead of a destructive enemy. I think there are ways that we can reframe our perceptions of conflict in the church to really see it as an opportunity to dive more deeply into our vulnerability, as well as to strengthen our community.
excellent.
Mhm.
When I'm scared and I don't know what to do,
When I'm scared and I don't know what to do, sitting in silence has been a welcome retreat for me when we think about being still and knowing that I am God. Whether that's being clear that the God around you, in you, that works through you, has always got you, and being clear that there is an aspect of yourself, which we had a dialogue in the beginning about our divinity, that is also operates as a refuge for us that we can sit in. If we can get still enough to know that in that stillness there is protection, that and that things will be revealed in terms of next steps in due timing. Because sometimes the knowing doesn't come when we want it to come. It usually comes for me in divine timing, and I don't believe I'm alone in that.
to more fully embrace my divinity, I should, or I could,
Lean into what makes you come alive and gives you joy.
let that be the last word. I love that word, joy. Let that be the last word. That's what I think about every time I hear your name, see your face, speak with you on the phone. You are joy. So thank you so much. And I'm going to ask, let's see. You know what? I'll do it. I just like to offer a prayer to end this session because you have blessed us so richly, and I really appreciate you, Kyndra. Thank you so much for all that you do in the world. Thank you for this book. I can't wait for it to come out. You just need to send us the the draft because we need it like right now. So, Divine One, we just offer our prayers and our deep gratitude to your daughter, Kyndra, who has brought such wisdom and grace and joy to this particular session. We thank you for all that you're doing through her and in her and with her and how she's sharing her gifts for the world. Now, send your angels to encamp around her, send all of the spirit guides and the ancestors and all of the great cloud of witness to be around her and with her to usher in an era of abundance and joy and love and peace and gratitude. We lift this prayer by your power and we say amen.
Amen.
Love you all. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.